Hello, my friend, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to be talking about the easiest way to set up recurring tasks in Notion. Let's get into it. I know I've been super MIA on the channel, but I swear to you, we have a whole bunch of really great content coming. I'm refining the channel. I'm getting back into Notion videos and really creating systems because that has become a bigger and bigger part of what I do inside of my business. So in this video, I'm going to be introducing you to my favorite strategy for doing recurring tasks in Notion. I have published 2 other videos on this. One of them was definitely very much a recurring tasks workaround. The second was an option that I really liked, but none of them were true recurring tasks. What they ended up doing is they ended up just making a duplicate of the task inside of your Notion system, which, don't get me wrong, was very functional and worked really well. But if you don't want to constantly be creating new tasks in your Notion system, you want to simply reset the due date of the task, this is the automation that's going to show you how to do it. The automation is only technical in one respect. There is an equation, but I'm going to go ahead and drop that equation in the description below. So when you get to that part, just go ahead and copy it from down below, okay? But the rest of it, it only requires 2 properties and 1 automation. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to do this as if we are starting from scratch, okay? So we'll start by building out a very simple task management database. If you already have one, you can skip ahead a little bit to the next chapters where we actually start setting up the things we need for the recurring tasks. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go down here and click database. I really like some of these built-in templates that they've already got for us. Let's go ahead and do a task tracker. We don't need to keep track of effort type or task type. We can do priority, and then we'll just go ahead and click get started. This is just their kind of standard task tracker inside of Notion. Now, I will admit, I personally do not like using a status property for keeping track of my done tasks. It feels like an extra step. To me, a task is either not done or it's done. With the status property, you have the opportunity to change something to in progress. I just never use that. So I'm gonna go ahead and hide that from this view. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a checkbox. And it is either done or not done to me. So what I personally like to do is I just like to check stuff off when it's done. So that's really all we need kind of for the basics of our task tracker. You can just click a couple buttons and it creates a task tracker for you. Now, what I would recommend doing, and we're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna duplicate this view here. I would recommend creating a new view called recurring, and you're gonna see a little bit later why we want to do this, okay? And then I'm gonna go ahead and use these kind of rotating arrows. I always find these by just typing in arrows and then picking the one that kind of fits what I was thinking. So in this view, what we're gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna get rid of assignee. We're just gonna keep this view very clean. And I wanna create 2 properties inside of this view. The first property is the property we're gonna use to keep track of how often we want our recurring tasks to repeat. So I'm gonna call this repeat every, and it's just a number property, okay? We don't need to do anything other than create the number property and type in the name. Then we're gonna go ahead and click this plus sign once again, and we're gonna create another checkbox property, except this time I'm gonna call this recurring. What we're gonna do with this is we're gonna use this to designate all of the different tasks that are recurring tasks. And I like to just shrink this down so all I can see is the checkbox. The number or the arrows are really denoting the fact that it's a recurring task. Now, what I also like to do is I like to filter this recurring tasks view so that it's only showing those tasks that have recurring checked. So you can see that actually removed our task out of this task database. We only want to see the tasks that are recurring. And what I like about this is then anytime I create a new recurring task, so like maybe I want to remind myself to like check my mail every Saturday or something like that. So we'll make this for the upcoming Saturdays, and we want to do this every week. Now, then anything I add in here is already going to have the recurring checked and be designated as a recurring task. So let's do a couple more. Maybe I want to do my weekly review on Fridays. And again, that's also going to repeat 7 times or 7 days a week. So you can just create as many recurring tasks as you want here, and they're automatically already getting designated as being recurring tasks. So that is really all you need to set up your system so it's ready for recurring tasks. Here comes the part that's the most technical. We're gonna go in and we're gonna click this lightning bolt right here. This is where all of your automations in Notion are stored. In every database, you can have separate automations that are only happening in that database, and you're gonna always click this lightning bolt to get back to your automation. So we're gonna click that lightning bolt, and we're gonna just set up a recurring tasks automation. We want this automation to happen for all pages in our task tracker. And the first thing we want is for two important things to happen, okay? Two things have to be true for this automation to trigger. Firstly, we want the done property to be checked. We only want this automation to fire when we have checked off a task in our system as done. And secondly, we only want it to happen on recurring tasks, on tasks that we have designated as recurring. So we want both of these things to be a part of our trigger, and we want this to only trigger when all of these things are happening. You can choose any or all inside of Notion automations. We want it to be all. Now, when this automation triggers, this is a true recurring task as opposed to just making a new copy of the task every single time it happens. I've recorded a couple other videos with recurring tasks, and the previous iteration of how to do recurring tasks in Notion was creating a new template every single time. This is a true recurring task in the sense that we are going to reset the due date every single time. And how we're going to do that is by going in and editing our due date property. And we're going to use a custom formula to edit our due date. So again, that was just new action, edit property. We're going to go to due date and go down to custom formula. Now, this is the most technical part of the process. I've gone ahead and I pasted this formula down below, but I'm going to walk through this formula with you. So first and foremost, we're going to use an if-then statement. Basically, it's kind of like an if this, then that sort of statement. What you're going to tell Notion is if a certain property is true, I want you to do this thing. Or if it's not true, I want you to do this thing. So there's three parts to the if-then statement, and you can kind of see it down here when I type in if this first thing is true, you're going to do this one. If it's not true, you're going to do this one. That's kind of how the if-then statement works. So we're going to go if parenthesis, and then I personally like to just create some space in my equations just so they're easier to read. And the first thing we're going to look at is if the due date property is empty. Now, the reason why we do this is we want to base our recurring time frame based off of a date. So if we want it to recur every 7 days, like every 7 days start from what? Do we want to start on Monday? Do we want to start on Friday? Like, what are we basing this off of? And how we're going to do that is based on either the trigger date or the due date. So the first place I like to start with this is to first look at if the due date for the task is empty. If the due date for the task is empty and we want it to repeat every 7 days, we want it to trigger off of the date that the trigger happened. So the date that the box was checked. So let's say I checked my mail on Saturday, but I didn't have Saturday as a due date in that task. I want it to use the day I triggered it. I want it to use the day I checked it off as due. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say, okay, if the due date is empty, and how we're going to do that is we're going to say trigger page dot due date. What this basically says is you are telling it to look at the trigger page meaning the page that fired the automation, so the page that you checked done off on. You want to look at that trigger page and you want to use the due date from that trigger page. This dot is kind of connecting these two properties together. So trigger page's due date. You kind of think of that dot almost being like possession in grammar. It's the trigger page's due date. If the trigger page's due date is empty, so we're going to close that. If that is true, now you want to tell it what you want it to do if the trigger page's due date is empty. And what we want it to do is we want it to do what is called a date add function. Basically what this does is it takes the date and then adds a certain number of days or weeks or months to that date. Again, this is a true recurring task. We're resetting the due date every single time this fires. So we're going to use this date add property. And what we're going to go ahead and do is first designate which date we are adding off of. And we want to do the date that's been triggered. So again, date triggered means the date that the automation was activated. So in this case, the date when your to-do was checked off. That is going to trigger the automation. So we want to use the date triggered. And then what we want to do is we want to tell it, what do you want us to add to that date? And that is our repeat every function. So remember, we created that number property just a second ago, and that number property is where we're going to designate how often we want this thing to repeat. I always do my repeat every in days. You can do this in weeks, you can do it in months. I personally like days because it gives you a lot of flexibility. If you want something to recur every day, you put a 1. If you want it to recur every other day, you put a 2. If you want it to recur every week, you put a 7. Or 90 days or whatever. Like the sky's kind of the limit when you do days. So what we're going to do is we want to pull in the repeat every number from the trigger page. So once again, we're going to do trigger page dot because we want the trigger pages repeat every number. We want that number that we have designated in the trigger page. So we're going to do trigger page dot repeat every, comma, and then what we need to do is we need to designate what the time frame is. Again, as I just said a second ago, I do my repeat every in days. You can do this in weeks. I personally would recommend just doing it in days. So what we've just told it is, okay, if this statement is true, if the due date of the trigger page is empty, this is what you're going to do. Now what we need to designate is what to do if it is not empty. And so we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to use a different date. So we're going to do our date add function again. But instead of doing the trigger date, this time we want to actually do it off of the due date. Because again, this second statement is if this statement is false. So if this statement, if the due date is not empty, that means the due date is full, we want to use our due date as the jumping off point for the new due date. So we're going to go ahead and do trigger page dot due date, because that's the page we want it to work off of. Then we're going to do comma, trigger page dot repeat every. Basically every other part of this formula is the same. And then you want to do days. It is important that you put days in quotation marks. Then you just need a double parenthesis because we're not just closing this date add property, we are closing this entire statement. So you need 2 parentheses at the end to close it up there, and then you click save. Then we're not done quite yet with this. What you also want to go ahead and do is we don't want to just reset the due date. We also want to uncheck the task so that it's going to reappear in our to-do list moving forward. So then we're going to go down here, edit property, done, unchecked. Oops, I forgot to actually click it. Done, unchecked. There we go. Then we want to click enable. Now let me show you how to test this out, okay? So let's say we want to check mail. And let's say I just did this yesterday. As I record this, it's 2:16. Let's say I just did this yesterday, so I want to check this off. Watch what's going to happen. It is going to reset the due date to 2/22, so the next Saturday, and it's going to uncheck the box. So now this is going to reappear in our system again. So let's say you wanted it to be like every 90 days. Same idea. We check it off. It's going to now change it to May 22nd or something along those lines. There you go. Yeah, May 23rd. So this repeat every column is you telling it, hey, this is how often I want this task to repeat. So to give you some ideas of what some recurring tasks could be, I have credit card payment reminders. I have reminders to get a haircut, to clean my fridge, to lubricate my walking pad belt. I hate that word. Whatever. To do my weekly reviews, to renew business licenses, so on and so forth. So a lot of different reminders that I have in here. And again, I like to do the repeat every in days because we'll look at the frequency that I'm able to do this with. Like I have one that renews every 720 days, one that renews every 180 days. It kind of gives you a ton more flexibility, and I like it that way. So really the most challenging part of this is going to be to set up that equation. Again, the equation's right here. I have pasted it down below. All you're going to have to do, because it's not going to paste in perfectly, you are going to have to go in and link these parts to the trigger page, to your due date, so on and so forth. So if you've got any questions on how to do that, if you get stuck anywhere along the way, I do have a free community and I have a Notion support channel inside of that community. Go ahead and check out the description for the link to that. I'd love to have you inside. All right, that is it. That is the easiest, most effective, and best way to do recurring tasks in Notion, especially using the Notion automations features that got updated in fall 2024. If you've got any questions about any part of the process or you struggled with any part of the process, drop a comment below. If you have any other things you'd like to see specifically about my Notion systems, again, comment. And if you really enjoyed this video and want to continue seeing more of this kind of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I plan to get back on that consistent content train, and I'd love to bring you along with me. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.